Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. It's now time for world news and current events with Tal Greenberg. Tal, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Welcome again, episode 4. It's been a long time since November 8th, but we're still dealing with the post-election hangover.
Oh, it's awful.
The Democrats didn't win for the most part.
Oh, they got their butts handed to them.
So Tal, what
Okay.
what would you say for all this? Like, what's going on
Well,
here?
it's been interesting because I've gotten both sides. I'm sort of a pox on both houses kind of guy. I'm very I'm a misanthropist with both parties. I dislike the way they both think. My friends on the left, it's all the sky is falling. They don't have any historical understanding of just the structures of how the election cycles work and what historical trends are, which are almost always bad. In the 6th year of the incumbent's party losing, the only one of the exceptions was, of course, Clinton. The impeachment actually, Clinton was able to gain seats in the 6th year, but he was also extremely popular at that point. But generally speaking, the 6th year of an incumbent president, you lose seats. You lose a lot of seats. You lose House seats. You lose
Sort of par
Senate
with the
seats.
course.
I think the spin doctors try to and the media try to keep it close and try to pretend it was a real election. The other
Was
story,
it never really close or what?
Polling was bad. I think the other issue is the turnout models were what was the problem.
Yeah, because
there was lower turnout
than
since
expected.
Since 1942. It
Wow.
was literally, if you want to look at the actual numbers, so it was 36% of Americans voted, of eligible voters.
And that's
voted.
the lowest percentage.
It's since 1942. That's
Wow.
the low. And then,
Now, is that in just midterm elections, or is that any election since 42?
I'm sure midterms are generally lower, so it's got to be in general one of the lowest outcomes.
Yeah.
And then you look at it. Okay, so Democrats still got some votes. So realistically speaking, the Republicans expanded their lead in the House and took over the Senate, taking 8 seats with 20% of the vote. If you really want to think about it, how it actually works out,
Wow.
about 20% of the country actually decided that the Republicans were going to be in charge.
Yeah.
Which are certainly their core voters.
And that's
Democrats
probably,
lost ground amongst white voters. They lost ground, really across the board.
across the board,
And-
even among...
People didn't show up. So
yeah.
then of the ones that did show up, the numbers were not looking good.
Would you say the ones that showed up were mainly white? Is that how it
No,
broke
well,
down?
older, whiter, married women
general.
versus in general.
As far as
I
majority.
mean, in general, of what actually showed up. Then, of course, the millennials, Hispanics, African Americans showed up less, and just a lot of voters just didn't show up at all.
Yeah.
So it really skewed, and the electorate was in a sour mood of the economy, and the economy is there are new jobs created, but people are middle class is falling further and further behind. Except what are they doing? They're electing Republicans, thinking somehow the Republicans are going to produce policies that are going to be helpful to them, which they're not, or B, somehow because the Republicans have control, then gridlock in Congress is going to magically end and more bills will actually get to Obama's desk that are reasonable and that he can sign.
But that won't necessarily
And
happen because
that's
it's not
not
like
going
the
to happen.
Republicans are
That's-
motivated
that's-
to
that's
pass
not-
any legislation,
They look at it
right?
and they say, this is a repudiation of Obama. We ran against Obama. Democrats ran far away from Obama and away from those policies, and they lost. And they're going to look at it as, okay, this is how we set ourselves up in 2016 to control both houses and take the presidency. That's how they look at it, and it is true. After the incumbents have been in power for 8 years, it's happened. It happened with Truman taking over Roosevelt, and then of course George H.W. Bush taking over from Reagan. Those are the 2 times where in history where the same party was able to control the White House. So It is still rare. It is rare.
Very rare.
It is rare in general. I don't know, at this point.
Rarer than a steak from Omaha.
I'm not sure Hillary can drag it across the finish line. At the same time, I also look at the Republican candidates, and they range from nobody knows who they are to everybody does know who they are, and what they know they don't like.
Yeah,
so,
either
I don't know,
scandal or they're totally right
I
or
just
crazy
don't know what that's going to be. But so the election implications are that you're going to see a lot of stuff that does come out of Congress. Is going to be, they're going to have to kowtow to the conservative base, probably have an attempt to defund Obamacare. It also, interestingly enough, puts some pressure on the Supreme Court, which recently took up sort of a drafting era in the legislation. And now that Republicans have control, it's sort of one wonders if the Supreme Court is going to change, because if they effectively rule on this case that the drafting error should be interpreted as is, then that will pretty much destroy the ACA. So that's a more technical argument we can talk to.
The ACA being, for those of you that don't know, the
Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare.
Okay.
That would be the
interesting. So
healthcare
they're going to
one.
try and
Basically,
eradicate it through the Supreme Court.
Yeah, the Supreme Court would
Republicans.
be the way. They could vote and they could try to attach. They could try to shut down the government. Obama's basically waited till after the election to put some executive action on immigration, which some would argue should have done it before. It might have helped save the Senate seat or two. I'm very much in doubt of that. The defeat was so bad, I don't think it would have saved anybody. Now it actually makes it more likely for the Republicans to say, well, we're going to use that as an excuse not to work with them. So he's going to take some executive action. There's going to be some pushback. I wouldn't put it past the Republicans for shutting down the government. They've got spending bills and the budget bills they've got to pass. They also might reverse the filibuster changes on the judicial confirmations, which would make it essentially impossible to get any judicial nominees through the next Congress at all. Other things that are going to go down in flames are really any kind of legislation that you and I would support, and that's not going to happen. There's no minimum wage increase, no regulation. They'll probably try to gut some of the Dodd-Frank regulations.
So it's looking pretty meek.
It's looking bad.
Well, let's back up a little bit, because last episode you were saying that Democrats actually looked it looked optimistic for the Democrats because they had such a strong ground game.
It looked.
So what happened there?
Well, obviously
What happened?
I think a bunch of paid consultants weren't doing their job, and were
phoning it in.
It's the same thing that has now happened. The parties have now become so polarized that they only listen to their own echo chambers. So I'm saying, oh yeah, and is it true that they registered voters? Is it true that they did a lot of outreach to voters? Yes, but at the end of the day, outreach and registration doesn't mean a damn thing if people don't actually show up and vote.
Yeah.
And were there some voter ID issues and some voter suppression? There was some of that, but it was not near the numbers that would have been to have made a difference in the election.
Yeah.
And that's where I definitely break from a lot of people that I know say, oh, well, that was a big part of the election. I'm like, no, it wasn't. People just didn't show up.
Yeah.
It would have, it wasn't like this was a point or two loss. In every race, they were losing 5-10 points.
Yeah.
And just dragging down. And the other thing that Republicans have done, and this is something we've talked about before, remember we were watching that tort reform documentary.
Oh, man.
One of the things that
Hot coffee, for those of you. Great reference.
Good documentary. But one of the things that they did is they said, okay, there's all these little crappy judicial races that they're putting people in, and the same thing that Republicans are doing in the state legislature. Nobody cares about the state legislature.
Yeah.
But this is where a lot of the policies get enacted, and this
Right.
is also where you develop a bench to get more candidates.
Yeah.
And now that the Democrats have effectively been wiped out since 2010, there aren't a lot of candidates left, and you have a lot of older people, and some people think, and I certainly would agree with this, that Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, like at this point, it's time for some new leadership. You gotta
fresh blood.
You got to move some
more
people
Cory
in.
Bookers in the
more Cory Bookers, but also just in general.
not necessarily him specifically in his politics, but just that young blood, the Obamas.
You need more people actually.
Even Barbara Lee, who's getting up there.
No,
but
we don't need Barbara Lee to get any more power than she has.
Uh-oh.
Sorry, disagreement there.
Okay.
But
we're gonna agree. Yeah, I think Barbara Lee is great, but but that remind that what I want to segue into, because locally, at least in Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area, California, election turned out pretty good. We got a new mayor, Libby Schaaf.
Yes,
she's
a good choice.
Yeah.
I think I definitely appreciate that. A lot of the you have the infrastructure bill passed, the local stuff, a lot of the funding measure. And actually, that's the other thing I do want to make a point nationally is you did have minimum wage did pass in a lot of even red states.
So that's a good
people do support more progressive policies. There is support for it, but even amongst people who did show up and vote and still voted Republican. So not all hope is lost, but at the same time, until the Republicans actually have an incentive to start moving to the center and finding common ground, they're not going to. So a lot of these policies, the states are going to make them. Marijuana policy also advanced at the state level. So there were things that were,
but that's still going to be at
Jerry
odds
Brown,
with the federal.
but in California, obviously,
Jerry Brown funded, and there's no
nobody even knew who his opponent was.
Yeah.
We did well out here, but it's just like we've got to win. We got to win in other states, and we got to win nationally.
But there were some small victories across state elections in California. And
minor victories.